The county clerk had processed thousands of deeds, but when she pulled up my father's property records and saw what was already filed there, she went completely still. My uncle was mid-sentence, still explaining why I had no claim, still quoting scripture about daughters being visitors. The clerk turned her screen toward him. He stopped talking. The Fulton County Recorder's Office does not look like a place where justice happens. It looks like every other government building in Atlanta, fluorescent lights that hum a little too loud. Linoleum floors worn pale in the center from 30 years of foot traffic, the smell of old paper and recycled air. There is a woman behind the counter named Beverly. She has a laminated ID badge and reading glasses on a beaded chain. She has worked here for 19 years. She has seen everything. She has not seen this. My Uncle Robert stood at that counter like a man who had already won. He had two of his sons flanking him, Cedric on his left, Philip on his right. And he had a manila folder full of documents he had been preparing for months. He was wearing his good suit, the one he wore to funerals and negotiations. He had not invited me. I had driven myself. He was mid-sentence when Beverly pulled up the file. He was saying something about the family's intentions, about stewardship, about how my father, God rest his soul, would have wanted the land to stay protected under the men who could actually do something with it. He was quoting Proverbs. He had the cadence of a man who was used to rooms agreeing with him. Beverly went still. Not nervous still, not confused still. The kind of still that happens when a person who knows exactly what she is looking at sees something that changes the entire shape of a conversation. She took her glasses off, put them back on, looked at the screen again. Then she turned it, slowly, deliberately, toward my uncle. Robert stopped talking. I was standing slightly behind him and to the left because they had not thought to include me. I watched the color shift in his neck. I watched Cedric lean forward to look at the screen. I watched Philip take a small step back, like a man who already understood that the ground had moved. Beverly looked past all three of them. She looked at me. "Ma'am," she said, "are you Vivienne Elaine Lawson Hall?" I said yes. "Then I need you to step up to the counter." To understand what Beverly saw on that screen, and why it silenced every man in that room, you have to go back. You have to go back almost 2 years, to a church basement in Atlanta, to the night my father's family told me that grief was the only inheritance a daughter was entitled to. My name is Vivian. I was 38 years old when my father died, and I want you to know who I was before I tell you what they did to me, because it matters. It matters that I was not weak. It matters that I was not foolish. It matters that I loved my father without any strings on it, and that he loved me the same way, and that for a long time I believed that was enough protection against the world. My father's name was Harold Jerome Lawson. He was a retired postal worker. He was 67 years old when he passed, and he had the hands of a man who had spent his whole life carrying things carefully. Not because he was fragile, but because he understood that what you carry belongs to someone, and you treat it accordingly. He owned a house in southwest Atlanta and 4 acres of land about 40 minutes outside the city. Red Georgia clay, old oak trees, a pond that dried up in August and filled back up every October like it was keeping its own calendar. His grandfather had worked that land. His father had held on to it. Harold had paid it off quietly, in the background of his life, the way black men of his generation did things. Without announcement, without fanfare, just steadily and with intention. Every Sunday we talked on the phone. Rain, shine, holiday, argument. It did not matter. Sunday was our day. He would tell me about his garden. I would tell him about whatever case study or policy revision was consuming my week at the hospital. We would talk about nothing for an hour, and everything would feel fine. 6 months before he died, he called me on a Tuesday. "I need you to come down this weekend," he said. I drove down Friday night. He was thinner than I'd expected. He was on a new combination of medications for his heart and for the fluid that had started collecting in his legs, and they made him slow in a way I hadn't seen before. Careful with his words, like he was choosing each one from a distance. We sat on the porch. He didn't say much. At the end of the night, before I went inside, he reached over to the side table and picked up his Bible. It was worn to softness. The cover cracked along the spine, the pages gilded at the edges and gone brown at the corners. He had carried that Bible since 1987. I had never seen him without it within arm's reach. He held it out to me. "Keep this," he said. I took it. I could feel something tucked inside the front cover. A folded piece of paper, thick and slightly stiff, like something that had been unfolded and refolded many times. I started to open it. "Not now," he said. "You'll know when." I didn't push. With Harold, you didn't push. You trusted the timing. He died 11 weeks later. Heart failure in his own bed on a Thursday morning in March. I got the call at 6:47 a.m., and I sat in my car in my apartment parking lot for 20 minutes before I could drive. And if you've ever lost the one person who made you feel like you were exactly who you were supposed to be, then you already know what those 20 minutes felt like, and I don't have to explain it. But I do have to tell you what happened at the repast, because that's where it started, and I need you to stay with me. Because what this family tried to do, and what I eventually found out they had been planning before my father was even cold, is going to make your blood run hot. Stay with me. The repast was held at Greater Emmanuel Church on a Saturday afternoon, my father's church. The women of the congregation had cooked. There was so much food it covered 3 tables end to end, and people came from 3 counties because Harold Lawson was a man people genuinely loved. His postal route friends were there, his garden club, old neighbors from the block he grew up on. A man named Eugene, who Harold had played dominoes with every Friday for 23 years, cried so hard at the gravesite that 2 ushers had to hold him up. That was the kind of man my father was. That was what they were already dividing up before the repast food was even cold. Robert was there. Robert Eugene Lawson was Harold's older brother by 4 years. He was a deacon at his own church across town, which meant he always had a Bible verse available for any occasion and always knew how to say cutting things in a register that sounded like blessing. He was a tall man, thickly built, with the kind of confidence that comes not from accomplishment, but from the consistent experience of being agreed with. He had what he called the Lawson Family Council, a handshake organization with no legal standing that he ran like a board of directors, himself as permanent chairman. Everyone else in whatever role kept them compliant. He had been running that council for 15 years. Nobody had ever seriously challenged him on it because Harold had always chosen peace over confrontation, and Harold was the only one Robert had genuinely respected. Harold was gone now. The balance was gone with him. Within 2 hours of my father's repast, before the dessert table had even been touched, Robert pulled me aside into the kitchen of my father's church. the room where Harold had helped set up folding tables every third Sunday for 30 years. "Baby," he said, and he always started with baby, the way some men use tenderness as a door they are about to close and lock behind you. "The family is going to need to get together and talk about Harold's property, the house, that land out on Route 9. We want to make sure everything is handled right. Protected." I said I appreciated that. I said I'd like to be part of those conversations. He smiled at me with the patience of a man who has learned that patience looks like generosity if you hold it long enough. "Of course, of course. Your family, Vivienne. We just need the men to get their hands around it first. Get organized. Too many voices too early and nothing moves forward. You understand?" I said I did. I thanked him. I went back to the reception room and I stood with my plate, and I smiled at people who asked how I was holding up, and I filed his words in the part of my mind that keeps track of things that need watching. His sons were there. Cedric, the eldest, who worked in insurance and handled money the way people do when they have always been the one doing the calculating. And Philip, the younger one, quieter, who had the look of a man who does what he's told by whoever is most confident in the room. His nephew Devin was there too, the one who had been in real estate for a decade, always had a development project he was working on, always had an investor interested in something. The three of them were together near the coat rack at the back of the hall most of the afternoon, and twice I looked over and the conversation stopped. Not embarrassed, stopped. Careful stopped. The kind of stop that means, not here, not in front of her. The church elder women, Miss Loretta, Miss Claudette, Miss B, women I had called auntie my entire life, who had fed me and prayed over me and pulled me aside at every turning point of my girlhood to tell me what kind of woman to be. They watched me that afternoon with something I can only call managed pity. Not the pity you feel for someone who has lost something they loved. The pity you feel for someone who is about to lose something else and cannot yet see it coming. I noticed. I catalogued it. I said nothing. At the 40-day gathering, I asked about my father's will. Robert said it was being handled by the family attorney and that these things took time and I shouldn't worry. I asked which attorney. He said he'd get me that information. He never did. I asked again at Miss Claudette's husband's birthday dinner in early May. Robert said the attorney was still in the review process. I said I understood that. I said I just wanted to stay informed as Harold's only child. Robert said, naturally, naturally. He moved the conversation to his church's new building fund and how much they had raised and whether I might want to contribute in Harold's memory. The third time I raised it, I stopped being polite about the setting. It was Sunday dinner at Adriani's house, 6 weeks after the funeral, and I waited until the plates were down and the children had gone to the back, and there was no comfortable redirect available. I asked Robert directly, with everyone at that table present, what the terms of my father's will said, and when I could expect to participate in the estate process as Harold's daughter. Robert set his fork down. He folded his hands. "The will leaves the estate to the family," he said. "That's how Harold wanted it handled. The family has come together and made a plan that reflects what Harold valued, taking care of his people. I'd like to see the document." "It's not ready for review." "I'm his only child," I said. "I have a legal right to—" "You have a right to grieve your father," Robert said. Quiet. Final. Like a door shutting in a house where nobody is fighting. "The rest is family business. Let the men handle it. Harold would want that." The table held its breath. Adrienne looked down at her plate. Not at me. Not at Robert. not at anything that could look back at her. Just down, at her food, with the expression of a woman who has already decided that staying out of it is the same as staying clean. I looked at that plate. I memorized it. The way you memorize things you don't want to have to remember later. Then I said, "Thank you for dinner." I hugged Adrienne at the door. She held on a half-second longer than she needed to, and I understood that she knew what she was doing, and I also understood that it was not enough. I walked to my car. I sat in it in her driveway for a few minutes. Then I drove home. I had my father's Bible in my purse. I had carried it every single day since he pressed it into my hands on that porch in the last good light. The folded note was still inside the front cover, the paper a little soft now from being carried close to my body, but still sealed, still waiting. I would take it out sometimes and hold it without opening it, running my thumb along the fold, feeling the slight stiffness of whatever he had written on paper that had been held by his hands. He had said I'd know when. The part of me that still heard his voice when I needed it most kept saying, "Not yet." Like the note was the final conversation between us, and once I read it, that would be over. And I was not ready for it to be over, so I carried it, and I watched, and I waited. 2 weeks later, the letter came. He answered on the second ring. That told me something. You don't answer in 2 rings unless you have been waiting for the call. "Now, Vivian," he said, before I had even finished saying his name. "I know this might feel sudden, but the family—" You listed Daddy's land. "The family made a decision, and without me, without one conversation, without a single phone call." Vivian. A breath. The patient breath. The one that said he had rehearsed this. "You are loved. You know that. But you don't have children. You're not married. You're not in a position to maintain property like that. And there's a developer who wants to do something real with it. Something that could benefit this entire family for years. That land has been in this family for 3 generations. And your father is gone, and the living has to make living decisions." He paused. Then, in a voice he might have used from a pulpit, low and certain and kind in the way that knives are sometimes kind because at least they're quick. "Daughters are visitors, Vivienne, not owners. I'm not saying it to be cruel. I'm saying it because that's the way it has always been, and pretending otherwise doesn't serve you." I hung up. I sat on my kitchen floor for a few minutes. Just sat there with my back against the cabinet and my phone in my lap, and the sound of his voice still in the room. Then I got up. I went to my laptop. I found a paralegal research service online, and I paid $200 I did not easily have, and I requested a complete deed and title history on my father's land going back to original recording. What came back 3 days later did not just make me angry. It reached into the past 2 years and rearranged everything I thought I understood about what had happened and when and who had known. The power of attorney, the document Robert had used to legally authorize himself to act on Harold's behalf in any property transaction, had been signed 18 months before my father's death. 18 months. Harold's first serious health decline had started about 20 months prior, right around the time they started him on the new cardiac medication. Robert had visited him during that window, sat with him in his house, explained, according to the document's own language, that he was just trying to make sure Harold's affairs were protected in case things got more complicated down the road. Harold, who trusted his brother. Harold, who was alone in that house, on 3 new medications, in the first disorienting months of a serious illness, had signed. I sat with that for a very long time. Then I began replaying the Sunday calls from that period. Every time Harold had seemed tired in a way that wasn't quite tiredness. Every time he lost a word mid-sentence or circled back to something he'd said 10 minutes before. I had thought it was grief. He had lost his closest friend the previous year, a man named Charles, who had been his neighbor for 30 years, and Harold had gone quiet in the way some men go quiet when they lose someone that fundamental. I had thought he was sad and healing at his own pace. I had not understood that what I was hearing was medication. That the man who had taught me to read every document twice, who had kept meticulous records of every payment he ever made, who had the deed and the insurance policy for every significant thing he owned in a fireproof box under his bed, that man had signed a power of attorney in a room with only his brother watching while I was 3 hours north, thinking he just needed time. And then I thought about Cedric and Philip at the repast, their careful quiet in the corner, Devon and his real estate contacts, the way they had been so coordinated, so ready, so unsurprised by the questions I asked, and so efficient at deflecting them. They had not started planning this after Harold died. They had been building toward it while he was still alive, while he was still in his house, while he was still picking up the phone every Sunday to talk to his daughter about his garden. I called Robert back that evening. I told him I had pulled the deed history. I told him I knew about the power of attorney, and I knew when it had been signed and under what circumstances. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "It's a legal document, Vivian, properly witnessed and notarized." I said, "Legal and right are not the same thing." He said, "You can feel however you need to feel. The sale is moving forward." I spent the following weeks making calls to family members I thought might be willing to say, out loud, to anyone with authority, that what had happened was wrong. Most of them didn't answer. 2 of them told me they didn't want to get in the middle of it. One of Harold's cousins from Alabama said he agreed with me, but that he was too old to get into family fights. I understood. I didn't blame him. I kept making calls. At a summer cookout in July, I found Miss Loretta in the kitchen putting foil over the potato salad. She was the one I had believed in most, the one who had known Harold the longest, who had told me at his funeral that Harold talked about me all the time and that he was proud of everything I'd built. I asked her if she thought what had happened to the land was right. She put the foil down. She turned to me. She took both my hands in hers the way she used to do when I was a little girl, and she was about to tell me something important. "Your daddy loved you," she said. Her voice was soft. Her eyes were full of something that might have been sorrow and might have been relief that the sorrow was mine and not hers. "He genuinely did. But baby, love don't transfer on a deed." I squeezed her hands. I thanked her for the food. I walked through the backyard and out to the street, and I sat in my car until I stopped shaking. Then I drove home. I sat at my kitchen table. I took my father's Bible out of my bag, and I held it in my lap, and I looked at the folded note visible in the front cover, and I thought about all the times I had almost opened it, and had stopped myself because I wasn't ready. I was ready now. I opened the Bible. I unfolded the note. Carefully, along the creases that had been folded and refolded so many times, they were soft as cloth, worn smooth by years of my father's hands going back to this same page, checking this same thing, keeping this same secret for the right moment. I read what he had written. I did not cry. Because what he had written was not a goodbye. It was not a comfort. It was a set of instructions from a man who had seen this coming long before I did, but I am not going to tell you what it said yet. Because first you need to understand exactly how far down I fell before I was ready to use what he left me. The land sold in October. $340,000. I found out through a public notice posted on the county website, not through a phone call, not through a letter, through a county website. The proceeds were divided among Robert, Cedric, Philip, Devin, and two other male cousins I had not seen since a funeral in 2019. Vivian Elaine Lawson Hall received nothing. Not a phone call, not an explanation, nothing. I filed an objection with the probate court. I hired the most affordable attorney I could find. She was competent and honest, and she told me, after reviewing everything, that the case would cost more to litigate than I was likely to recover, given the legal validity of the power of attorney. She said she was sorry. I lost. That December, Robert gave a speech at the family Christmas gathering, which I attended because I did not yet know how to stay away from the people who were hurting me, which is a thing grief does to you that nobody warns you about. He thanked the men who had protected Harold's legacy. He talked about stewardship and responsibility. He talked about how Harold would be proud. People applauded. Miss Claudette wiped her eyes. I was at the far table, the children's table, functionally, the folding one near the kitchen door. No one had assigned me there. It had just happened, the way erasure often happens, gradually and without any single person having to admit they are doing it. An auntie leaned over to me on her way to the dessert spread. "You made things ugly," she said, not unkindly. "You should have just let it go." I stopped going to church. I stopped going to family events. I stopped eating properly, and I stopped sleeping through the night, and I lost 11 pounds in 3 months without trying. My apartment felt like a waiting room for a life I no longer recognized. I went to work. I came home. I held my father's Bible every night, and I did not read the note again because I had it memorized, and because I was not ready. Not yet. Not quite yet. There is a particular kind of pain that comes not just from being betrayed, but from being betrayed by the people who were supposed to be the proof that you were loved. Robert had held me at my father's funeral. Miss Loretta had called me every birthday since I was 7 years old. Adrian had been my maid of honor at a wedding that eventually failed, and I had been hers at one that lasted, and she had looked down at her plate. That plate. That specific plate. I kept coming back to that plate. In February, on a Thursday night, I was sitting on my couch with the lights off and my phone face down when a Facebook notification appeared. A message from a name I didn't recognize. A woman named Cynthia Barnes Holloway. The message said, "I think your uncle sold your father's land through the same developer who took my family's property in DeKalb County, and I think he got paid twice." I turned my phone face up. I read it again. A finder's fee. Robert had brought the property to the developer as a referral, under the table, separate from his share of the sale proceeds. He had not just stolen his brother's land on behalf of the family. He had sold his brother's land and then taken an additional private payment for making the introduction. He had profited twice off Harold's death. I stared at that message for a long time. Then I wrote back. Cynthia Barnes Holloway lived in Decatur, and she was sharp, in the way that women who have been underestimated their entire lives get sharp. Not bitter, but precise. She had lost her family's land 2 years earlier through a similar mechanism. Same developer, similar pattern. She had been gathering documentation ever since, the way some people tend a garden, steadily, without guarantee of harvest, because the tending itself was the only thing she could control. She had a contact, a cousin of a friend, a probate and real estate attorney named Wallace Odom, based in Washington, D.C. I took a bus to D.C. on a Saturday morning in April. I sat in Wallace Odom's office for 4 hours. He was a quiet man, methodical, the kind of lawyer who asks the same question 3 different ways, not to catch you in something, but to make sure he understands exactly what happened. He had seen cases like mine before. He told me 2 things that changed the architecture of my next 12 months. First, a power of attorney obtained while the signer is under significant cognitive impairment from medication can be challenged on grounds of undue influence. Harold's medical records from that period, which I had a right to request as next of kin, might show exactly what he was on when he signed. If the impairment could be documented, the POA could potentially be voided. And if the POA was void, the sale built on it was void. Second, he told me to request a complete title history going back to the original land grant, not just the last 20 years, all of it. I paid $800 for that search. I worked overtime for 6 weeks to save it. I did not tell anyone what I was doing. I kept my head down at work, got a project management certification I had been putting off, picked up a consulting contract on the side. I was quiet in the way that my father was quiet when he was doing something important, not secretive, just focused. Robert posted photos of his new truck on Facebook, tagged the cousins, tagged the church, never tagged me. I didn't care anymore. I was busy. The title history came back on a Wednesday morning. I opened it at my kitchen table with coffee I didn't drink, and there it was. 22 years earlier, Harold Jerome Lawson had filed a quiet title amendment on that property. A protective filing, recorded with the county, that designated the land as separate heir property, not subject to unilateral transfer by any single family member acting under power of attorney. It was a technical filing, the kind that requires knowing something specific about property law, the kind that most people never think to make. Harold had made it in 1999, when Vivienne was 16 years old. When Robert had first started making noise about the family pooling resources, Harold had known. He had seen it coming 22 years before it arrived, and he had quietly, legally, built a wall around what he intended to leave behind. Now I understood the note. He had written 2 sentences in his careful postal worker handwriting, pressed into a piece of paper he had folded and refolded until it was soft as cloth. The land is already yours. I filed it that way the year you were born, not the year he made the amendment. The year I was born. He had been planning to protect me since before I could walk. I called Wallace Odom. He took the case on contingency. I did not call anyone else. Robert's eldest son, Cedric, was getting married in September. The invitation arrived in my mailbox, which told me one of 2 things. Either they thought I was defeated enough to be safely included, or someone in that family still had enough conscience to feel the absence of my name on the guest list. I almost didn't go. I sat with the invitation on my counter for 2 weeks. Wallace called me the morning of the wedding. The court accepted the title challenge, he said. Hearing is set for November 14th. Do I tell them? Not yet, he said. You walk in there today and you are just family. Let them think nothing is coming. I put on a navy dress. I did my hair. I went. The wedding was held at a church in Buckhead, And it was beautiful the way that events are beautiful when the people planning them have money and want everyone to know it. The reception was in a rented hall with a live band and passed appetizers. I found my seat, which was near the back, and I accepted a glass of champagne I did not drink, and I watched Robert give a toast about legacy and family and the Lawson name, and I kept my face completely neutral the entire time. Toward the end of the cocktail hour, Devon appeared at my elbow. He was softer than I remembered, less certain, something worn around his eyes. He said he wanted to apologize. He said he had felt bad about how things went with the land. He said Harold deserved better. For a moment, for one specific, dangerous moment, I felt the pull of it. The relief of being acknowledged. The temptation of letting someone off the hook because forgiveness feels better than carrying the weight of what they did. Then Devon said carefully, with his eyes not quite meeting mine, I hope you're not still pursuing anything on the legal side. It's been a while. I figured maybe you'd moved on. I looked at him. I have moved on, I said. I smiled. I went to find more appetizers. Devon watched me go. I could feel it. I did not look back. November 14th, Fulton County Probate Court, Atlanta. Robert arrived with 2 attorneys, one for the estate matter, one for himself personally, which told me that someone had already advised him that his exposure was not just civil. He brought Cedric and Philip as character witnesses. He brought Miss Claudette, who had written a letter attesting to Robert's long service to the family and the community. He was prepared. He was confident. He had beat me once in this system, and he expected to beat me again. What he did not expect was what he saw when he walked into that courtroom. I was already seated at the plaintiff's table. Wallace Odom was beside me, his briefcase open, his notes organized with the quiet efficiency of a man who had been building toward this specific morning for 11 months. Beside him sat Dr. Patricia Hennings, a certified forensic document examiner, brought in from a firm in Charlotte. And on my other side sat Cynthia Baines Holloway, dressed in burgundy, her own folder of evidence in her lap, her expression the particular calm of a woman who has been waiting a long time to be in the right room. Robert saw me and something crossed his face. Not fear. Not yet. But recognition. The recognition that something had changed that he had not accounted for. He whispered to his attorney. His attorney looked at our table and whispered back. I did not look at Robert. I looked at the front of the room. I straightened my jacket. I placed my father's Bible on the table in front of me. Just set it there, quietly, the way you set down something that belongs exactly where you put it. I did not open it. I did not reference it. I just let it be present. Cedric, in the gallery, saw the Bible and looked away. Miss Claudette saw it and closed her eyes. The judge entered. We rose. We sat. And it began. Dr. Patricia Hennings testified first. She had examined the original power of attorney document using signature analysis protocol she had applied in 47 cases over her career. What she had found was this. The signature attributed to Harold Jerome Lawson showed tremor markers in the pen pressure and stroke deviation consistent with late-stage beta blocker and diuretic interaction. A specific physiological signature that appears in voluntary motor function when the signer is under certain medication combinations. She presented the comparison signatures. Harold's signature from 2015, from 2017, from the power of attorney itself in 2019, and from a card he had written Vivian in 2020, 8 months after the POA, when his medication had been adjusted. The 2019 signature was the outlier. The others were consistent. The POA was the one that didn't match the man. Harold's medical records, subpoenaed and entered into evidence, confirmed that in the 3-week window when the POA was signed, he had been on a combination of 2 medications that his own cardiologist had subsequently flagged as causing decisional capacity impairment in elderly patients. The cardiologist had changed the prescription 4 months later when he noticed Harold's cognitive processing had slowed. Robert's attorney objected twice. The judge overruled twice. Then Wallace stood and entered the title history into evidence. He walked the court through it slowly, the way you walk someone through something that is both simple and devastating. The original grant, the transfers through generations, and then the 1999 Quiet Title Amendment filed by Harold Jerome Lawson, recorded in full with the county, designating the property as protected air land not subject to unilateral POA transfer. The filing had been there for 22 years. It had never been searched. Robert's attorneys had pulled only the last 15 years of history when they structured the sale. They had missed it, or they had not looked. Either answer said something that could not be unsaid in that room. Robert was very still. The judge reviewed the filing. She reviewed the sale documentation. She reviewed the letter from the developer's own legal team, which Cynthia had obtained through a records request, that referenced Robert Lawson as the referring party, with a separate payment line noted as referral compensation. $6,200 paid to a personal account in Robert's name 2 weeks before the sale closed. He had stood at his nephew's wedding 2 months ago and given a speech about the Lawson name. He had done it with $6,200 of finder's fee money already in his account. The judge set her reading glasses down. "Mr. Lawson," she said to Robert, "the 1999 Quiet Title Amendment is a valid recorded instrument. The power of attorney, obtained under circumstances this court finds consistent with undue influence and cognitive impairment, cannot supersede a recorded protective filing of this nature. The sale conducted under that instrument was not legally executable." She paused. "The sale is set aside. The property reverts to the estate." Robert's attorney was already leaning in, already whispering, but Robert was not listening. He was looking at the Bible on my table. Wallace stood again. "Your Honor, the estate of Harold Jerome Lawson. The plaintiff has one additional item to enter." He nodded to me. I had not told anyone about this part. Not Cynthia. Not even Wallace until 3 weeks ago, when I had finally made the appointment with the second attorney, the one Harold had used quietly, privately, at a small firm in Decatur that had nothing to do with Robert, nothing to do with the family, nothing to do with anyone Robert knew, the will, the real one. Harold had updated his will 6 months before he died, with an attorney Robert never knew existed. He had left the house and the land, specifically, to Vivian Elaine Lawson Hall. He had named her sole heir and estate administrator. He had signed it in front of 2 witnesses and a notary in good health, before the medication changes, with his full handwriting intact. The will was entered into evidence, certified, dated, unambiguous. Robert made a sound I had never heard a grown man make before, something between breath and collapse. I did not look at him. I opened the Bible. I took out the note. The paper soft as cloth from 22 years of being folded and carried and held by a man who had planned this from the beginning, who had loved me quietly and with tremendous specificity, the way he did everything. Wallace said, "The plaintiff would like to read this into the record." The judge said, "Go ahead." I read it. 2 sentences. Harold's careful handwriting, the letters even and deliberate, the way his signatures always were, except for that one window when they weren't. "The land is already yours. I filed it that way the year you were born." I folded the note. I placed it back inside the Bible. I closed the cover. I thanked the court. "I want to tell you what happened to Robert because I think you want to know, and because I think you've earned it. The referral payment, the finder's fee, was referred to the Fulton County District Attorney's Office for review of potential fraud in connection with an estate sale. Robert's attorney negotiated a repayment agreement in lieu of prosecution. The truck went back. Some of the sale proceeds had already been spent and took longer to claw back. That process is still ongoing. The aunties who stayed silent have not called me. I have not called them. I understand that they made a choice inside a system that taught them that silence was survival. I am not interested in punishing them for that, but I am also not interested in pretending it didn't happen. Adrian called me in December. I let it go to voicemail. I haven't decided yet. The land is mine, all 4 acres. I go out there on Sundays now, the same day Harold and I used to talk. I walk the property line the way I imagine he did, slowly, with no particular destination, just the feeling of being somewhere that belongs to you and that you belong to. The oak trees are the same. The pond filled back up in October, same as always. The clay is that deep Georgia red that gets on everything and doesn't come out. I have not sold it. I don't plan to. I carry the Bible with me when I go. The note is still inside it. My father wrote it decades ago and carried it to me in his last good months, and I carried it through everything that came after. And now it lives in the front cover of a worn Bible that smells like him, and I think that is exactly where it belongs. Here is what I know now that I did not know when I was sitting at that far table. My father never told me I had power. He just made sure I had it, and trusted me to find it when I needed it most. The lesson he left me wasn't in a courtroom. It wasn't in a deed. It was in a piece of paper tucked inside a Bible that he handed me on a porch in the last good light of his life. And what it said, in the end, was this: I saw what was coming. I prepared for it. And I trusted you. The hardest thing about being underestimated is that it requires you to endure being seen incorrectly by people who should know better. Robert looked at me and saw a woman with no husband, no children, no standing. He saw someone who could be safely excluded. He saw a visitor. He did not see what my father saw. He never did. That was his loss, not mine. If you want to protect land or property inside your family, especially from people within your own bloodline, drop a comment below. I'll tell you exactly what to look for and what your rights actually are. And I want to know, if you were the one sitting at that far table while they divided everything your parent built, what would you have done? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one.